Hi, my name is Jason Clark, and I am the Extension Soil Fertility Specialist here at South Dakota State University. And today we're going to have a quick Q&A session, and that Q&A session is going to be on the topic of prevent plant, its effect on fall and spring fertilizing plans. So this past year we've had a lot of rain in the early spring, and that's equal to a lot of late planting or no planting in a lot of our fields throughout South Dakota. So the question we're going to answer today is, how does that affect our fall and spring soil sampling and our fertilizing plans for next year? So first of all, if we think back about this year, early spring came on, a lot of us were able to get out there in our tractors and go and apply the fertilizer. And then we're able to get some rain to come and be able to incorporate that fertilizer into the soil just like we wanted it to. And the next thing we wanted to do was be able to get out there with our tractor and get that planter out there and get that corn planted. However, instead of that, a lot of us experienced this. Rain, and even more rain, and that rain turned from puddles into ponds, and sometimes even looked like there was a lake out there. Some of your kids, or maybe the kid in you, even wanted to get that canoe out and do a little canoeing across that field in some of those areas as you were waiting for things to dry out. But eventually the rain stopped, fields dried out, and we were able to do something. What that something was depended on what our resources were, what our management practices typically are. For some people, they're able to get out there and plant some cover crops, and those cover crops were beneficial because they're able to interact with fungi to help increase those populations and keep them up to avoid things like fallow syndrome. For this next upcoming cropping season, they're also able to help increase our soil organic matter, hopefully improve our nutrient cycling in future years. However, some of us couldn't get cover crops planted because it was just too wet. However, eventually we're able to go out there and do some tillage to reduce weeds and other things like that. However, some of us do no-till operations, so we chose not to till, or some of us couldn't even get out there because it was still too wet. So all we could do is watch the weeds grow in the field and hope that we could eventually get out there and control those weeds to reduce those weed populations. So depending on what situation you had, and it may be a combination of these situations as we can see here, a lot of the questions that I've been getting is that I applied nutrients at the beginning of the season or last fall. So where are the nutrients that I applied? And depending on the situation that we had this awesome answer in academia that all of us know and love. It depends. It depends on what is the important part here. So it depends on whether those nutrients were mobile or immobile. So for example, if we talk about those mobile nutrients first. So here we have our field, we've fertilized it. You can see the small white dots are the fertilizer in our soil profile according to depth. So as we can imagine, as we applied those, the rains came and those mobile nutrients move down with that water as that water moves down, and a lot of them tend to move down and out of that area in the soil that our roots can get down to and be able to use those nutrients. And those are what mobile nutrients are. Mobile nutrients move a lot in the soil with that soil water especially. And the ones that we're really talking about here are the nitrate form of nitrogen and the sulfate form of sulfur. So then the question goes is, so it rained a lot, I applied some of these nutrients. What about next year? What do I do? So when we're going out there, we're considering sending out our soil sampling crew or whether or not to. This is kind of the recommendation that we have. The recommendation is that we go out and we take a 0 to 6 and 6 to 24 inch soil sample to determine nitrogen sulfur fertilizer needs before a nitrogen required crop, such as wheat and corn. However, we do have a few considerations to think about with this when we do these soil samplings, and that goes on to what of these situations do we see. So when that soil sampler, what they need to consider are a few things here. The first one is that the nitrogen can increase in fields where no crops were planted. So even if I didn't even put nitrogen on the crop for this past year, that organic matter in the soil, whether or not I planted cover crop or not, is decomposing, and that's increasing the amount of nitrogen that can be available for next year's crop. So depending on our rainfall this past fall and spring, we could have a greater amount of nitrogen credit than we normally do, which is important because if that nitrogen credit is larger, we can reduce our nitrogen fertilizer inputs for this next growing season. Another thing to consider is this. that nitrogen sulfur may have been taken up by those cover crops, which would help it from being moved down in the soil profile, which would make it available for the coming year, which is important, which is what we want. And that's another benefit of planting cover crops, is able to take up those mobile nutrients so they don't move down and out of the soil profile. So if we move from mobile nutrients now to immobile nutrients, we can see as the rain falls here what that difference is between mobile and immobile nutrients. We still see movement of those nutrients in the soil profile moving down, however it's not nearly as much. As we notice, we also didn't see nearly as many nutrients move down and out of the profile. They're still there, but they've moved some. So immobile doesn't necessarily mean they don't move at all, it just means that they move very minimally or very short distances. And so the nutrients we're talking about here, this is in regards to phosphorus, potassium, and zinc are the main nutrients here. There are also others, but these are most of the main nutrients that we would be applying here in South Dakota. So as we think about sending out our soil sampling crew, whether to or not to, there's a few things that we need to consider, and here's a few of them. So first of all, if we apply those nutrients, as you can see from our demonstration, those nutrients are likely still available unless we removed a crop or something from the field. So if we planted cover crops and then hayed it and removed it, we could have also removed some of those immobile nutrients in the field. So then we can assume that they're still there. However, the only way to really know what's there is to do some soil testing, to go out there and take those 0 to 6 inch samples, send them to the lab, and get the information back so we know how much of these nutrients, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, and others that are immobile are still in that soil. And then just kind of a rule of thumb, if we're going to be planting corn this next year and we had a medium to low phosphorus level in our soil, that it's generally recommended to apply a small rate of phosphorus as a starter. So I hope this answers a little bit of some of your questions out there regarding soil sampling, prevent planned acres or acres where we weren't able to get planted last year or we just planted cover crops. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. You can see my contact information here at South Dakota State University on the screen in that lower left-hand corner. And also in the description, we will post a link to an article that I wrote regarding the same information. So if you like that form of content, you can go ahead and reach it there. So we thank you for your time and look forward to more discussion.